So there was a bunch of discussion in Overwatch on Twitter and stuff like that about hero bans because somebody called Metro? Do any of you guys know who Metro is, by the way? Should I know who this person is? I don't really know who they are. I'm going to ask my chat that question first. It's not some notable leaker or anything, right? Oh, it's a streamer. Okay. A Soldier One Trick streamer. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, normally you would expect big leaks or something like that to come from Slasher or whatever, but who knows? Oh, they've already leaked some stuff in the past. Oh, interesting. They know people. They've got the inside knowledge. Okay. Well, anyway, there was a tweet from them, and it made the community, sparked up the community discussion about hero bans again. And it led Jeff to post this. And first of all, I just want to say, amazingly eloquent, long, thoughtful, detailed post from the developers. I think truly the Overwatch team, but particularly Jeff, the level of meticulous communication they go to regularly is phenomenal. I think the big issue that the community brings up is that they're not very frequent, but when the developer team does speak to the community, it's always incredibly well thought out and meticulous. Every single point is hit. And I think this post was fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to read through this post from Jeff. But I'm not going to read through every single word, but I'll kind of summarize it. So Jeff starts out and he says, they've seen a lot of discussion about hero bans over the last couple of days, and the Overwatch team has a range of opinions about it. Most of the team doesn't want hero bans in Overwatch, including Jeff himself. And he kind of goes through some of the reasons why that is. They're not completely opposed to the idea, and they're not saying they'll never add them, but there's a number of issues that they've identified. Then he talks a little bit about design philosophy just in general, saying that he doesn't want to add them just because other games add them, which I think is a good thing. The hero bans, are very different in other games, and I'll get into that later, but hero bans in MOBAs, which is where you normally have hero bans, are incredibly different. For some very fundamental reasons that negate a whole spread of arguments that people bring up both for and against them, because people just haven't thought about what the differences are between MOBAs and Overwatch. Okay, so then he says, when he hears arguments for hero bans, the conversation usually revolves around these three reasons. One, meta stagnation, which to me is like the biggest thing that the whole Overwatch community is talking about. That's the reason that so many people were in favor of 222 to begin with, because it stopped GOATs from dominating the meta. It's the most constant either complaint or comment on the state of Overwatch is that the meta tends to be stagnant. I think if you had a meta where you could play everything, and it all seemed reasonable in a game of pretty much any level to play a bunch of different stuff, people would be a lot happier with the game. I'm not saying they would be happy, because the Overwatch community and every community involved with gaming is never happy. They love to grab the pitchforks and rise up and stab the people who aren't cavemen, but, you know, they would find something different to complain about at that point. They wouldn't really complain about the meta that much. So I think Jeff's point here is pretty spot on. People don't like that the meta stagnates, and they do believe that with hero bans, they'll be able to ban out meta heroes and move the meta. Now, I wouldn't just say that they believe that's the case. That would happen. If you had any reasonable implementation of hero bans, it would stop the meta stagnating. And he tries to counter this point later on, but I believe that his argument is not just slightly flawed, but completely flawed. So I'm going to kind of break that down, because I haven't really heard anybody completely break down this paragraph from Jeff, but when I read the entire thing, and the paragraph I'm talking about I'll get onto later, there was one paragraph that I just thought the entire reasoning was very flawed. But I'll talk about that later. People are frustrated with the balance of certain heroes, and they want to ban them. People don't like playing against certain heroes, so they want to ban them. These might initially seem similar. Like, the majority of the time, people don't want to play against unbalanced heroes. But these are very different. You know, Jeff's making the distinction that it is a different point to want to ban an OP hero than it is to ban a hero that you don't like playing against personally. An example that would make sense, apart from Hex just screaming at flashbang and dash resets, which he does on the regular, it might be, hey, I want to play Tracer in this game, so I'm gonna ban Brigitte. You know what I mean? You could set it up so that you don't feel like Brigitte is overpowered, at least in her current state. You just don't want to play against her because you've got it in your head that you would quite like to play Genji that game. That's more what he means in that sense. So then he says those are the three reasons that we normally see. So as a team, we agree with and understand that players want the meta to be more fluid and move more frequently. I think that just that sentence in itself and the follow-up at the bottom of this paragraph is some of the best example of Team 4 listening to feedback and communicating that they have heard the feedback that I have ever seen. And I think that it's fantastic. I mean, it's kind of passive-aggressive, but I also love that. I love that Jeff's got a little bit of sass, you know? He says, as a team, we agree with and understand that players want the meta to be more fluid and move more frequently. Here he says a comment that I think you could disagree with, though I'm not going to spend too much time on it. He says, even though the vast majority of players only experience the meta through OWL, feedback from GMs, streamers, and YouTubers, we get the perception of a stale meta is not good for the game. Even if it is a perception, I think that Team 4 is quite right that even a perception of a stale meta is not good for the game. Even if the meta was wonderful and you could play whatever you wanted, if the perception of it was that you could only play Orisa Sigma, and therefore a lot of people did, or even felt like they were throwing when they didn't play other heroes, that would be bad for the game. So you not only have to tackle what is actually happening in reality, you also have to tackle the perception. And those can be two different issues. Having said that, I think you could argue that the vast majority of players only experiencing the meta through OWL, feedback from GMs, streamers, YouTubers, etc., is arguable. I think that this comes from win rate and playtime statistics that they're gathering from stuff like quick play and from competitive. And I think what they've got there is that they are collecting data from a lot of players who are not having these complaints. It only matters that the meta is balanced for people who care that the meta is balanced. And those who care that the meta is balanced are the people who are playing competitive and probably from, you know, gold upwards, the ones who feel like the meta is oppressive for them. So once you select down to the sample of people who are affected by the issue, I think it's more likely that the issue does exist and it's not just a perception issue. But having said that, I don't have access to the stats myself. Having said that, it's kind of a moot point, because he follows it up by saying, we absolutely have plans to move the meta more, and we'll be talking about these in an upcoming developer update. We get it. We agree. Make the meta move faster. Okay. I think that's a resounding win for the people in the Overwatch community who have been complaining about the stale meta for a while. I actually tweeted a while back as well that I think I said one of the biggest discrepancies between the developer team and the community, as I saw it, was that whenever I've talked to the Team 4 and the developer community, they really try to make a balanced game. And they often seem to feel from playtime, from win rate, from statistics, from their own experiences, that the game is much more balanced than the perception is. And even when the game is pretty balanced, pro teams still try to find that like 1% edge, and so they can end up playing the same composition over and over and over again, even if it only gives them a 5 to 10% advantage over playing a different composition. So it can make the meta feel like it's you have to play this comp, but the difference between that composition and the next composition is only a 5% difference. But to a pro team, that really makes a difference. To people who are playing in ranked, it might not make that much of a difference. And so the developer perspective is, okay, it's actually a pretty well-balanced situation right now. But because the perception and because the pro level is trying to grind out that extra percentage and whittling its way down to a more stagnant meta, what the community I think is more desiring is the meta feeling fresh. And I think there's a couple of ways to achieve a fresh meta. You either have a very balanced meta or you have one that changes frequently. And so whilst trying to balance the meta, which is much harder than making it move all the time, they are also presumably going to be making the meta move faster as well. So here's the paragraph though that I totally disagree with. This one at the top here says, just implementing hero bans does not mean the meta will move. Studying other games, the end result is usually a ban meta. The downside of a ban meta is that players are often at odds with each other when someone on their team bans an off-ban meta hero. The same frustrations that players experience with the meta exist in a ban meta. Hero bans are not a silver bullet solution to make the meta move. If the problem we are trying to solve is that the meta needs to change more, hero bans might actually make the problem worse, not better, etc., etc. This, as far as I can see, is just wrong. And the reason that it is wrong is that the games that are being studied here, almost certainly, from all the experience that I've been able to gather, from years and years and years of watching various different kinds of esports, the games that he's talking about here are ones where you cannot pick the same hero as your opponent. The only thing that ever creates a ban meta is a pick meta. Right? So if you have, say, 5 heroes, let's say Overwatch, so it's 6 heroes, but you have a pick order. You can pick a hero first, and that denies it from being picked by your opponent. You are now incentivized to ban very powerful heroes so that your opponent can't pick them away from you. But in Overwatch, you will never, ever, ever get that because your opponent can never pick heroes away from you. So therefore, you are never incentivized to ban only specific OP heroes, because if they pick them, you can also pick them. So you think to all other MOBAs, think League of Legends and Dota, because they're the most obvious examples. The ban metas that happen in those games are because you can't afford even the chance of your opponent picking some really powerful heroes. Because then you can't pick them, and they're too powerful, so your opponent will win. But if you could both play them, it would be more advantageous for you to maybe sometimes ban the powerful heroes, but sometimes ban the heroes that their team is better with, sometimes ban the heroes that their team is familiar with, sometimes ban the heroes that their team has found success on, enjoys practicing with, that your team is weak to, this kind of stuff. The only ban meta that I could see occurring is in a pro level scenario where teams want to ban the heroes that are most crucial for the prevalent best comp, so that you deliberately force them off the meta comp. But once you've done that, there will be no set counter pick. It's just whatever the better team wants. And at that point, by being the better team, you have forced the enemy team to pick something very predictable. And it would never happen in ranked because you never assume that the enemy team is just better at you at the default comp anyway. So, as far as I can think of, there is no way in which you would get a ban meta in Overwatch. Like, there's actually no way. And Custer actually ran a little straw poll on his channel, actually, that asked people in chat, which was a nice little sample of, the average ranked game. And he said, which hero would you ban? Because a lot of people seem to think that if there was, say, if each team was allowed one ban in ranked, people seem to think that the same thing would get banned every time. It wasn't definitive whatsoever. I think Mei led for a little while, and then Hanzo overtook, and Orisa and Batiste were both just behind, and then Doomfist was still really high, Widowmaker was still really high. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. Obscure Reference 7 says, pros could ban useless heroes in order to force the meta comp. If you had one ban per team, the better team could, but they would be wasting their ban. And the other team would be incentivized to ban something that takes them off the meta comp. If both teams truly believed that they were the better team at the meta comp, then yeah, you could get that. But that wouldn't happen very often. It would be incredibly rare that it was the best choice for you to just not ban anything. To essentially abstain. That would be a very strange scenario. The reason, Relist, that happened during Jane's tournament is because the teams had already been practicing with goats. So the only compositions they knew how to play were goats. That would never happen in a pro-level scenario because teams want to win more than they want to play what they're comfortable with. ZDog454 says you could ban the counter meta's most important hero. That relies on you being able to know exactly what meta is best when you ban each of the 30 heroes in the game. Or at least each of the 6 that's used in the prevalent main comp. That creates such a exponential tree of different probabilities. Like, okay, you've got 6 heroes that you say are the meta comp. Say it's like the current compositions that are being played in scrims. Okay, someone bans Orisa, that triggers a new branch of the tree. Someone bans Sigma, that triggers a different branch of the tree. There's a whole new meta that develops when Sigma's out of the game. You ban Batiste, okay, different again. You ban Mei, okay, different again. Hanzo, different again. That's just from one team banning. From then the other team banning, each one of those branches splits off into a bunch of different branches. The complexity it adds is enormous. And actually, that's one of the reasons that I'm not in favor of hero bans. I think this argument doesn't hold up. Just that paragraph. But that doesn't mean that I'm in favor of hero bans. I don't think that they're a good thing for the game. And one of the reasons is the complexity is so large that I think the skill level of the game would reduce quite significantly. Okay. Let's carry on, though. In regards to players wanting to ban for balance reasons, the way we plan to address this is with more frequent balance updates. I think this is very good. I think that's a great thing. The upcoming dev update will go into depth in the plan and shed light on how they're going to accomplish this. That's good. The other reason he listed was that players do not like playing against certain heroes. And he said, basically, it's a PvP game. You don't get to pick what the enemy team does. The challenge is overcoming the enemy team with teamwork, ingenuity, and skill. He said, it feels really off to him that the other team dictates how or what I play. So if your reason is you don't want to play against certain heroes, I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that point. We've changed our minds in the past, but that's where we're at it for now. I think that this is certainly an argument, but I think that this is another fairly weak argument. I don't think it's completely wrong, like that one, but I think it's pretty wrong. Or at least not very powerful. The reason being is that if you have one hero that terrorizes or defines a meta, then what you're essentially doing is prioritizing one person's happiness, the person that's playing the hero, over the 6 people who are playing against it, and possibly the other 11 people that are in the match. If there was one hero that was truly busted, that was just... every fight they got 5 kills, it was fucking awful to play against, that kind of thing. I mean, like, way more busted than anything has ever been in Overwatch. Just to, properly push it as far as we can to see whether this logic would still hold up in that case. If you had a hero that was that horrible, not that it was... let's actually make it so that it's not OP, it's not unbalanced, it's just awful to play against. Say it just has a global slow that triggers every 30 seconds. Everybody's slowed, so it's not OP, but it is horrible because you just feel like you're walking through sludge. Literally a little bit like that, right? But so imagine a hero that feels awful to play against for a lot of different people, but isn't actually OP. It would be reasonable to allow players to ban that, because it's the happiness of 5 to 11 people versus the happiness of the one person that's playing it. So I think the argument that the other team shouldn't dictate how I play doesn't really hold up, because you're not weighing one person's enjoyment against another one person's enjoyment. You are potentially weighing up a whole team's enjoyment versus another player's enjoyment. So I don't think this is a particularly strong argument. But I'm not that bothered by it. Like, I also think that the majority of the time, as long as the balance is okay, there aren't that many heroes that are completely unfun to play against. There are some, but there aren't that many. And they're only bad if they're both powerful and unfun to play against. If someone's playing some hero that's unfun to play against, but they're weak, you can just deal with that. It's not a problem. It might be a little bit annoying, but it's not a problem. You're not going to mold over it. Okay. And then there's a discussion, a follow-up argument about one-tricking a hero. And I'm not really going to go into that. Jeff just basically says, Overwatch is not a game where you should really be one-tricking. We're not going to ban you from one-tricking, but it doesn't really matter that... We're not going to ban you from one-tricking, but we don't want you to do it, so we're not going to protect one-tricks. So, which I think is a very reasonable thing as well. And he says, for a few of the reasons, we are reluctant to pursue hero bans at this time. We've been pushing for faster match times, and they don't want bans to slow things down. I agree with that. I think that's a very good point. I also think that it would be, in some sense, a fairly interesting part of pro play, but in other senses, it would be fairly boring for your casual viewer as well. The ban phases of MOBAs can be tedious at times to listen to as a casual viewer. I'm a casual viewer of games like League of Legends and Dota 2. When it comes to the big tournaments and they're talking about why certain heroes are banned, they have so many different reasons why it could have been banned, because there's so many different heroes in the game that it's a bit of like woo-woo analysis a lot of the time. The bans for maps in CSGO can be interesting, but it's quite dry. It's quite dry and analytical, and so I can certainly see how introducing a ban phase to the start of every Overwatch match and every match in Overwatch League could certainly bore people. Don't think it's a huge argument against, but I think it's a reasonable one. So, okay, on the whole, I thought Jeff's post, though, was eloquent, meticulous in terms of the points that it covered, and was pretty enlightening as well. But let's talk about hero bans overall, because I think there's more points to hit on here than not just from the developer point of view, but just from the state of the game overall. I would say a good definition for an excellent state of balance in Overwatch is a balance in which teams at the pro level, I'm going to mainly talk about the pro level because I'm interested in Overwatch League more than I am in casual ranked. And I also think that it's very difficult to balance from the bottom up. Most of the time you have to balance from the top down, because the actual elite players are the ones that are going to try and wring every last drop out of what you've failed to balance correctly. The people at the bottom of the game are just little Timmies. They're just waddling around like they don't even know what's happening to them. Even people at my level, they don't know what the hell's happening in Diamond or Plat. They just run around like headless chicken. They're just playing their game. They play whatever hero they want. It'll probably work. But the pro level is where they're trying to really wring the 5-10% advantages out of things, and so your balance has to be really good in order to have a diverse strategy at that point. And I think a good definition for good balance in Overwatch would be one in which pro teams can all have distinct and different styles, because instead of the game's balance forcing your choice of how to play, like we all have to play GOATs because it is the best thing to play, their individual strengths and weaknesses should be the things that influence what they play. And you only get individual strengths and weaknesses influencing how you play if the difference between your strength and your weakness is bigger than the difference between what's good and bad in the game. Like what heroes are good and bad. If the game was perfectly balanced, it would all come down to strengths and weaknesses. Like you could play anything, but it would be up to you how good you are with it. Now that is an unrealistic expectation, but I think 2019 saw a real lack of distinct styles for the Overwatch League teams. If you gave me, and I've watched so much Overwatch over the years, enormous amounts of Overwatch. If you gave me all of the VODs for 2019 Overwatch League, I think I would struggle to identify, and you took all the names off everybody, and the home team skins and stuff, I think I would struggle to identify which team was which. I think there's some that would very obviously stick out, but in a GOATs versus GOATs match, even then, the styles weren't that obvious. It was less obvious than 2018 for sure, and it was less obvious than the most of Overwatch as well. Yeah, God bless fucking Chengdu, honestly. Okay, so that's what I think should be your aim. That's your philosophical aim while doing balance, in my opinion. So, and I think it can be achieved by either having incredible, impeccable balance, which you should always be striving for, but is very, very difficult to actually achieve. So you should keep doing that, keep trying to balance your game, but you should also do other things which can help in that direction. And the other things that you do are to try and have a meta that's impossible to solve. And there's a few ways that you have metas that are impossible to solve. They can change very often. That makes metas very, very difficult to solve because they're changing and you don't have enough time to be able to really boil them down to this is the best way to play. At the beginning of every meta, we always see a lot of teams trying different compositions, trying different things. It always seems really exciting. And then over time, it tends to boil down. Now, also, though, that graph tends to go like, oh, it boils down, people are playing less and less compositions. And then over time, it starts to get bigger again as well. Because once they try cracking it more and more and more, the meta does tend to open up a little bit. But it takes so long to be able to do that, that most of the time your viewers and your players are bored by the time you get to that point. So you can make a reasonable argument, like we saw with Stage 3 Overwatch League. People have been playing GOATs for so long that they figured out ways of being able to make it difficult for GOATs teams to play against by playing this triple DPS kind of stuff. And it wasn't giving consistently great results against everybody, but it was doing well enough that Shanghai Dragons were able to win the tournament, and other teams like the Valiant were able to take wins off the Titans. Houston were able to take wins off the Shock, not playing triple DPS, but something slightly different. But that was kind of the rebound of a meta being studied too long. Now, another way that you can make a really difficult meta to solve is if you have very little scrim time, or if a patch was really recently. So not just because patches are coming often, but if a patch happened yesterday, the meta's difficult to crack just by virtue of time. Or if you don't have enough time to actually scrim, if you're a pug team, or if you're a team where your travel schedule is going around all the time, that is going to make the meta a lot more difficult to crack. That's going to make teams have more distinct styles. And the other thing is, a meta is going to be incredibly difficult to crack if it has crazy complexity due to bans. That's why hero bans make the meta more diverse, is because it introduces so much complexity that not only do you just get the advantage of, I ban Orisa, therefore the meta changes, doodly-doo, but also, I ban Orisa, the other team bans Hanzo. Okay, now we're in a totally different direction than if I had banned Sigma and you had banned Hanzo, or if I had banned Orisa and you had banned Mei. There are different things that change, and it's not just variations of the same style. There are whole new compositions that unlock once you actually ban certain metas, certain heroes from the game. And like I said before, this web of complexity gets exponentially larger the more heroes you have, the more bans you have, and they stack on top of each other exponentially, as I was saying. In 2020, we will have a number of these coming into play, more than we did in 2019 anyway. We're going to have pockets of teams playing in certain locations. We're going to have teams in Asia, teams in the East Coast of the US, teams in the West Coast of the US, and most of those teams are going to play against teams that are close to them. That's going to create diversity in and of itself, because they don't have experience scrimming against other teams that figure out ways to break things or introduce new novel concepts. This has happened across all different games. There have always been localized stylistic differences in any game that you want to look at. But it's also happened in Overwatch. When we used to be before the Overwatch League, before everybody was actually playing in Los Angeles, European teams, North American teams, Korean teams all had very, very different styles. In fact, sometimes wildly different metas. And still in contenders at the moment. I mean, Goats was fairly dominant, but you still had Sombra Doomfist being played over here, like a very aggressive style of Goats being played over here, a Sombra Goats being played over there, this kind of stuff. So just localizing teams and separating them out creates bubbles of diversity, which I think should go quite a long way to being able to shake things up more than 2019 would have ever given you. The team homestands will also mix those up, because you don't just get the Asian teams playing against each other with their own meta, and the European teams, or not the European teams, the East Coast teams playing against each other with their own meta. You get them interacting with each other in many, 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 many different combinations. Each homestand is its own little soup of different ingredients from the regions. And that will make each match more special and unique anyway. In 2020, you also have the advantage of, I say advantage, it's going to be an advantage in terms of a bit of diversity anyway. It's going to be an advantage for viewers. That because teams can't scrim as much, I mean, we saw Harsha come out on Twitter recently and say that he reckons it'll be about 60% of what they were able to scrim in 2019. And yes, the Overwatch League teams were scrimming a lot, but 60% is an enormous decrease, right? Because they're able to scrim so much less, they are not going to be able to practice as much. They are not going to be able to be as broad in the things that they can handle, and playing weird niche strats will net you results. It will. If you play stuff like Chengdu, you have to be able to think about Chengdu from 2019. You have to be able to take on the normal meta, but then you also need to scrim against any weird stuff that Chengdu's doing. Now, if you don't live in Asia and you don't have time to scrim them, and you also have to think about how much scrim time you even have, and you have to prioritize playing against the teams in the league that play normally, the teams in the league that play weird shit will get wins, even if they're worse. So as soon as they realize that, and I think that 2019, the way that like Valiant and Chengdu actually had, and Houston Outlaws had success in Stage 3 and I think a bit of Stage 4 as well, by playing different stuff, that is going to incentivize teams to play different things and break away from the meta in order to have some creatively different strategies that will apply pressure to teams that they know haven't been able to scrim effectively to be able to deal with it. So I think 2020 is the worst season for hero bans, or any kind of hero rotation, or anything like that. Any forced hero bans for specific maps, hero bans for specific stages, hero bans for specific matches. I think this is the worst season for it. Because a good meta, or at least a diverse meta, is likely to form anyway, especially with the developers also committing to more meta changes per season. And this is the most crucial part. A bad implementation of hero bans will fuck the game right up. Right up. It will fuck it up. And there are so many more ways of implementing hero bans badly than there are implementing it well. Think about all the ways you could implement hero bans. I would say at least 70% of those are going to be terrible. If you have well, actually, before I get on to the ways in which hero bans could be poor, if you have match bans, if you ban things out for an entire match, well, here's the thing. There's so many different ways that bans could be implemented. People like Custer have been discussing bans where it's one ban for each team per map, and the bans reset at the end of every map, and the bans are after you know the roster. Now, you could do bans before you know the roster, and it would be a very different scenario. I would argue better, Custer would argue worse, because Custer prefers teams that are not specialists, teams that are kind of all-rounders. I prefer having niche strategies. Huck has been tweeting a lot about a system that he would like to see, where each team bans a hero for each map, but they add on every single map. So if you had a 5-map series, by the end of it, 10 heroes would be banned, which seems to me to be a terrible way of doing it, because that would ban like a third of the roster. And Junkbuck came out and said he thinks that hero bans just at all would be a bad idea, because there are so many more maps and modes in Overwatch than there are in MOBA games. So because you not only have to prep for the hero being banned and the metas that you might experience with each hero banned, you then have to prep that for each map, or for each mode, and then for each map within that mode. The level of complexity goes up enormously in a season where you're already struggling for scrim time, and unlike a MOBA, you don't have any items that you can buy to modify your hero to make them more generalist. They are stuck with what they are. Those heroes are specific heroes. You can't try and take a dive team and make it a poke composition by modifying the heroes. MOBA games, one map, a bunch of different items you can use to customize your heroes, and a ban phase that you use to try and get a general theme for your team. Overwatch is very different to that. I think another big argument here, though, and one of the reasons that I'm not in favor of hero bans, is that in an ideal world, let's take the example that Custer is using, which I think is the most reasonable example, where each team gets one ban per map and they reset at the end of the map. I think that's a reasonable implementation of hero bans. Anything apart from that would just be pretty batshit insane. Okay, so I am the worst team. Let's say the worst team gets the ban first. I think the worst team is not incentivized to ban a strong hero for their opponents. They are incentivized to ban heroes that just take them away from the meta. So I think that hero bans, it's not that they would be the same things every time, but their purpose would be to instill chaos rather than for strategic purposes. The strategy for weaker teams would be to make things very chaotic and push it outside of the comfort zone for top teams to points to compositions that they would have never practiced before, because that evens the playing field and reduces the advantage that they have for being a good team. Now, personally, I think that this is something that isn't just a personal opinion. I think this is obviously subjective, but I feel that it has value. Chaos isn't appealing for viewers. It's not appealing to be able to generate storylines. It fails to reward good teams. It fails to give an expectation for what viewers might see and then either subvert or fulfill those expectations. I think that the more chaotic the Overwatch League gets, the further away you get from the things that are really cool to watch. Like set plays where somebody's, it's 3 ults being used in a specific manner that have a very satisfying end result of a team wipe or something like that. Now, some people do like chaos. Some people love just watching Chengdu run in there and just fuck people up. Which is why I'm saying that I think it is a subjective thing. I think if that happened a lot, even if 50% of the teams in the league were Chengdu, I think that would be a worse viewer experience. I think that Chengdu is good because they are individual and unique and distinct. I think if a lot of different teams were trying to make it as chaotic as possible, I think that would be less good. But this is my opinion at that point. I think that chaos is less good for the game. And this is what Junkbug says as well when he tweeted. He said, hero bans would be fine if we were only playing on King's Row, because then the teams can be prepared for a lot of different options that would come at them in terms of the compositions that they'd have to play, and they could actually start developing strategies. So not only would they be kind of comfortable with the composition enough to play it properly, but they'd be able to start crafting some unique strats, which I like unique strats. I think they're cool to watch. Stuff like the great bamboozle from the LA Gladiators, one of the greatest moments that we've seen. A lot of other set plays are some of the most memorable moments in the Overwatch League. The Defran over the roof kind of shit. Stuff where you're comfortable enough with the basics that you can start implementing either cool or interesting or unique things on top of that, the strategy layer. So Junkboy was saying, hero bans would be fine if we only had one map, one mode, and we got to practice that as much as possible. If you want to implement it across all different maps, you're going to create a very chaotic environment that doesn't really say who's the better team. It says who's the better group of players and who can thrive in chaos more. And that's okay. That's not Overwatch. That isn't what we've come to love about the game Overwatch. That would be a very different feel for the game, but it would be different. I think it would be a little bit worse, quite a lot worse, but some people might like it. So it's a subjective thing. I also think that any system where you accidentally did set up a ban system where you either banned too many heroes per match, like say each team was able to ban each team was able to ban 2 heroes per map. Now you've got 4 heroes banned from a game. It's very likely if you're playing ranked and every ranked game you play, there are 4 heroes banned in each game. It is quite likely that the hero that you want to play gets banned fairly often, because that's just statistically likely. There are only certain heroes that people would feel are worth banning, and if you want to play one of those heroes, it would come up fairly often. I think that would be a bad thing for the game and for the player experience, because there aren't that many heroes in the game. Most people have some idea of what they want to play when they enter the game, and keeping a high or growing active user base I think should be a key goal for Overwatch. If there is a system where certain heroes were regularly banned, or if there was a hero rotation system where, okay, for the next 3 months Orissa's out, a lot of those people, I mean, there aren't that many horse mains, to be fair, but if it was something like Mercy previously, let's let's remember back to the days where popular heroes were also broken and would want to be rotated out of the meta. Those casual players that loved Mercy would be mauling out of control. They would have just straight up left the game, for at least for that duration until the hero came back. But I think that's a big risk, is that keeping a high active user base is actually should be, I think, a key goal for Overwatch. And you're risking that kind of stuff with a system. If you implemented a system where many heroes are banned, or the same heroes did get banned frequently. So I think that is a concern for Overwatch, but it would all depend on the hero ban implementation. But the devil is literally in the details here. Hero bans is all well and good to throw around as a concept, but it all depends on the implementation as to how many bad things you have to weigh against the good. I suppose you could combat that with something like free-to-play, but at that point, why not just wait for Overwatch 2? Because Overwatch 2 has already been announced and is in the pipeline, and you know it's coming out at some point. So if you're going to make large moves like that, why not wait for that kind of stuff?